Introduce our speaker, Noah Platt. He's going to tell you more about himself when he comes up here, because there is way too much to tell. But just some basics. He's a junior cellular biology major. He was born in Florence, Kentucky. Moved to Dallas in 2015. Wants to go to medical school after he graduates and specialize in pediatric emergency medicine. He is a Delaney resident assistant, so that's one of our residence halls on campus. He is on the Shriner Forensics team captain, student government senate speaker, and works in the admissions office for recruiting and also as an ambassador. So please welcome Noah Platt.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for having me here. When I was first asked to come and talk about the trip to Northern Ireland, I thought, how the heck am I supposed to put 2 weeks worth of jam-packed activities into a 25-minute or so presentation? So the answer to that is leave a lot out. So bear with me if it seems a little bit splotchy, but the task is pretty difficult. What I'm going to be focusing on today is what you see at the bottom of that screen there, which is nurturing hope, a journey of working towards better societal realities by accepting and legitimizing people with perceptually opposing views. Because as I'll get into later, sometimes they don't actually have opposing views. Wrong way. So as Ms. Lincoln mentioned, I am pretty involved on campus. I'm the type of person where if I'm sitting in my dorm room with nothing to do, I feel like I'm not taking full advantage of the college experience. So I get very involved on campus, much of which was already mentioned in my introduction. What I think is very interesting and important about being so involved on campus is when I was given this opportunity to go to Northern Ireland, I really was interested because of all the different areas on campus that I would be able to apply what I learned. Take, for example, even the title of the conference, it's Nurturing Hope, Conflict Resolution, Peace. As a resident assistant in Delaney, I deal with a lot of roommate disagreements and have to find some form of conflict resolution between two people that are, stuck in a 15 by 15 box for a whole year. That being said, I'm not new to the idea of people's worldviews affecting how they see the world. We always talk about, even if two people look at one issue based off of their past experiences, their family backgrounds, their upbringings, they'll come to two completely different, views of what should be done. This is a representation of my family. On my dad's side of the family, on that left-hand side, that's a flag that many people on my dad's side of the family really like and really stand by. And on my mom's side of the family, the flag on the other side, that's a flag that they hold very dear. And as I'm sure you can all imagine, they do not get along. There are a lot of topics of conversation that are banned at Thanksgiving and Christmas. But it's been a great experience for me because I've been able to understand that you can look at something and both people are right. Both people are completely legitimate and trying to do what they think is best. But based off of the way they're viewing the world from their experiences, they're going to come to two different conclusions. In addition to my family tree, there's kind of three main life experiences that have taught me that people coming from different perspectives genuinely see the world differently. The first is I'm actually fluent in Japanese, and so I was able to attend the Japanese school of Cincinnati when I lived there, and then Dallas once I moved here. These are schools that are not for Americans, they're for Japanese people who their families are over in America for 3 to 5 years. I'm not exactly sure how my parents got me into that school, but what's important is that I was getting an education on Saturdays from the aspect of the Japanese government's educational standards, as well as I was homeschooled, so I got it from the American perspective. So as you can imagine, I learned about World War II twice from two completely different perspectives. Right? You can look at the same things that happened, and what was good, what was bad, the mistakes were made are completely different depending on who's teaching it. In addition, I was able to go to India in 2019 on a mission trip and just really see a world where the caste system is legitimized. You know, if you walk around America and try to justify the caste system, you're probably not going to get very far. But in India, that's the reality. You're playing duck duck goose with a group of kids, and certain 5-year-olds are not allowed to sit next to other 5-year-olds, and they know which ones they're not allowed to sit next to. I'm also a EMT basic with a city ambulance service, and so that every single patient comes from a different background, a different worldview. They have different past experiences, and getting to have those conversations with them is really been really beneficial to see kind of that change of perspective. Now, some people would say that it's really odd that I would go to a peace and reconciliation conference because I've always been known as a natural instigator. I think it's fun to argue with people, obviously in a controlled manner, but as was mentioned before, I'm captain of our speech and debate team, and we did relatively well last year. So we were competing and arguing at a very high level. So with that being said, I'd like to go ahead and metaphorically fly off to Ireland. With going in, I was having experience understanding that people with different worldviews and people from different perspectives see the world differently. And then me loving verbal conflict or discourse, right? People having those difficult conversations. And so I wanted to take that pre-experience and then mold it and shape it by what happened in Ireland, and then come back and apply what I learned. So a little bit about what we actually did before I get into specifics. The first week was actually on site at the Kerrville community with the specific official nurturing hope conference, which was divided up into 3 sections. The first 3 days was the underlying fundamentals of conflict, right? Because if you look at all the different conflicts, no matter what level they happen on, whether they're happening between countries, between different societal groups within a country, or even person to person, even roommates, in Delaney Hall, there's certain dynamics that are synonymous throughout all the different forms of conflict, and how conflict has its effect on communities, relationships, hopes, and how people are living their lives. Then the second 3 days was specific case studies. We spent 1 day studying Northern Ireland, 1 day on the Korean Peninsula, and then a 3rd day on the Colombian conflict, and really looked at not only how those fundamentals of conflict are making themselves known in each of those conflicts, but also what can be done in the different types of conflicts. How can you alleviate the conflict that's happening? And then the last bit was that application piece. How do we take the steps we can take towards conflict resolution and actually apply it and make a difference in the community that we go back to? Because at this conference, we had youth workers, we had professors, we had teachers, we had school administrators, we had trauma therapists. We had all these different people coming from different life experiences and what they're actually doing in their day-to-day life. But everyone has something to do with how can we resolve conflict in the communities we go back to. So that was a pretty heavy week. It was a really good week, but it was really heavy. So then we took a couple of days to kind of explore and enjoy the Northern Ireland coast. You see some pictures up there. We went to the Giant's Causeway, which is a really cool rock formation. There's very few places in the world that are like that, and then the kind of hexagon rocks in the middle there. We went to the Rathlin Island Bird Sanctuary. We took a short ferry ride out to an island off the coast. Went to the bird sanctuary, saw some puffins. We actually biked 4 miles across the island along the coastline. So that was a great experience. And then the next day we went hiking at the Murdoch Bay and Fairhead that was right next to it. This was absolutely insane. Our guide was a naturalist in the area, a very experienced naturalist, and so he knew all the ins and outs and the secret paths and everything like that. There was one time we were kind of going down a cliff, and so we're going down this very steep trail, and there's a hole in the ground, all the way on the left there. And as a joke, because there's no way that we're actually going in that hole, I say, oh, but that's where we go next, right? He's like, yeah, exactly. And then he says, follow me, and he jumps in the hole. And so we're all standing there like, well, okay, there's not really anywhere else to go. Turns out it was only like a 10-minute little tunnel, so. But, you know, looking at the picture, I would jump in there. And then the last day, we sailed up and down the northern coast of Ireland, which that was a fun experience because it started storming in the middle of it. And we're in this, 5-foot wide, 25-foot long sailboat with 10 of us. And so there were times where I'm like, is this safe? Probably, but here we are today. But it was a great experience. We saw some sea arches and some castle ruins and everything like that. So it was a really great way to kind of, rejuvenate and kind of get ready for what we were about to encounter. And then the last few days was really seeing hands-on, on the ground, what does conflict in Northern Ireland look like. And so we went and saw some youth centers. We interacted with people whose families had been directly affected by the conflict and the violence in Northern Ireland. And then we also, on a big scale, we talked to some negotiators from the Good Friday Agreement, which that was really interesting to see 3 different levels of the Northern Ireland conflict. And what was really interesting is there was one situation where in the morning we talked to a nice lady whose partner had been, she was a journalist, and her partner had been killed in one of the riots that had happened in Derry. And so we heard about that injustice and how the people who shot her had not been brought to justice, and they were just walking around living their life. And then a few hours later, we actually went and walked around the community and saw the youth center where that shooting had occurred. And we talked to one of the youth workers who grew up in the community. And he talked about the exact same situation, but from a completely different perspective. He talked about how he acknowledged that it was unjust and that it was not right that it happened. But he knew who it was. And when the police tried to get him to talk about it, he wouldn't do it because it would ruin the good work he was doing in his community. And he talked about how difficult it was to make that decision. And it really brought into perspective that sometimes there is no good answer. There is no easy answer when it involves conflict. So now talking about something that I really kind of stuck with me from the conference. One of the fundamentals of conflict is this idea of rivalry, right? You have 2 groups of people. There's some identifying factor that separates them. You have the white pawns on one side and the black pawns on the other. And there can be an element of fear, right? If you have limited resources, you want to protect your group, right? You want to make sure that your group is safe and has all the right resources. So at any chance you can, you kind of elevate yourself a little bit. You maybe try to get your people elected as the leaders of the government. You try to put rules in place that kind of protect the resources for your group. Then the other group, they see that, and they don't want to fall behind. They're now scared. They think, oh, the white pawns are trying to take over. They're trying to control our lives. So then they elevate themselves, and they try to put themselves in a position where they control what's going on, right? Where they control the day-to-day happenings in a society. But the white pawns, in response to that, they elevate themselves, right? Put more rules in place, right? Separate themselves a little bit more. And next thing you know, there's this constant battle of trying to elevate yourself until you reach a point where there's horrible conflict. And what's interesting is a lot of times when that conflict occurs, no one actually remembers what the original conflict was about. They're conflicting because they're scared of the other side. Because if you're not for us, you're against us. And this was, I saw on the ground in Northern Ireland. I have 2 pictures here. They're both from what they call interfaces. These are kind of where Protestant communities and Catholic communities meet in the city of Belfast, because you have the areas where the Protestants live and you have areas where the Catholics live. On the left-hand side of the screen, that's a park. There's a wall and a fence right through the middle of the park. One side is the Protestant side, the other side is the Catholic side. If you're Protestant, you don't go on the Catholic side. If you're Catholic, you don't go on the Protestant side. And quite often on weekends and stuff, people are throwing bricks and rocks over this fence. When we were walking around, we had 2 youth workers with us, one Protestant and one Catholic. That way we were allowed to go wherever we wanted. And when we were in the Catholic section, every time the Protestant guy was talking, he used his fake name. He used a Catholic name. That way he wouldn't be, ostracized and be put in a dangerous situation. Similarly, on the right, there's a boulevard here where 100 feet down the street on the right, you have an elementary school. And on the left behind that building, you have an elementary school. There's 2 elementary schools within 200 feet of each other, but the only difference is one is for Catholics, one is for Protestants. And the reason the posts are cameras, and the government had to put those cameras in because every single weekend there would be rioting at this interface. It doesn't show up in the picture very well, but the building on the left, it's a nice building, but it was just built 2 years ago. On the other side of the street, it hasn't been rebuilt yet, and there's just houses in shambles. I mean, there's no windows, no doors. And so it was really interesting to see, kind of that conflict between the Protestants and the Catholics. But going back to the rivalry that I just mentioned, only 5 to 10% of the people living in these communities are actually practicing self-identifying Catholics or Protestants. They don't practice the very thing that's dividing them. They're just continuing to live in that cycle of fear of the other side, of kill or be killed, because that's what they were taught by their parents, that's what they were taught by their grandparents. And if they make friends with someone from the other side,